A white sheet of snow blanketed the vast prairie as the bitter wind roared over the frontier, carrying with it the howls of wolves and the whispers of danger. In the midst of the swirling storm lay a half-collapsed wagon, splintered and abandoned, a silent testament to tragedy. There, clinging to life, was Eleanor Harper, a widowed settler, barely able to keep her own eyes open, cradling two newborn twins against her chest. She had no food, no supplies, and scarcely any hope left. But just when the darkness of the western winter threatened to claim them, salvation emerged on the horizon in the most unexpected form, a Comanche tracker. The year was 1867, and the West still called to dreamers, wanderers, and the desperate alike. Eleanor Harper was no different. A young woman of 23, she had been raised in the rolling hills of Tennessee. She met Walter Harper, a man nearly a decade older than her, but with a heart full of daring. They married after a short courtship, both propelled by the same longing for a new start and a plot of land they could call their own. Word had spread back east that free homesteads awaited in the Kansas Territory and beyond. With the Homestead Act of 1862, many families had sold all they owned, stuffed their belongings into creaking wagons, and set off across the prairies prepared to do anything to claim a better life. By the time Eleanor and Walter joined a wagon train heading west from St. Louis, she was already nearly 7 months pregnant. The old midwives in her hometown advised against traveling so close to her term, but that warning did little to discourage Walter. Driven by unstoppable optimism, he kissed her forehead and promised that once they arrived in Kansas, they'd be living a life of prosperity and open skies, just as soon as they staked a claim and built a cabin. Neither of them truly understood the perils that lay ahead. The plains were teeming with challenges: weather extremes, bandits lurking near remote trails, and the growing friction between settlers and native tribes. Yet the Harpers pressed on, trusting that the wagon master, an experienced frontiersman named Elias Brubaker, would guide them safely. The early days of the journey felt almost like an adventure. Wide-open vistas greeted them each morning. Prairie grasses tall as a man's waist swayed in gentle breezes. The wagon train made steady progress, crossing the muddy banks of the Missouri and forging deeper into open territory. Sometimes they'd see antelope bounding across the horizon. At night, they'd gather around the campfire, telling stories of dreams and fortunes. Despite her swollen feet and frequent fatigue, Eleanor had Walter's strong arms around her, and she found comfort in his unwavering support. But nature has little mercy on the frontier. Storm clouds would roll across the open sky with astonishing speed. Howling winds and lashing rain forced the caravans to halt more than once. Each time they lost precious days in their schedule, burning through supplies. Elias Brubaker grew ever more tense, warning them that traveling too late into autumn would be dangerous. The wagon train divided over disagreements on whether to press on quickly or to find a safe place to winter over. Ultimately, half decided to remain at a trading post near the Kansas River, while Elias, the Harpers, and a handful of others pushed forward. It was right around that time Eleanor felt the first strong pains in her belly, reminding her that her twins would not wait. Still, Walter insisted they could make it to Fort Larned, a real name well known among travelers for its protective walls and basic medical supplies before the birth. He swore that the presence of soldiers and a steady flow of traders would keep her safe. Eleanor tried to believe him. She'd always believed him. Late autumn turned abruptly into a savage winter storm. Few in the group had seen anything like it. One morning, White flakes began to swirl. By midday, the wind howled down the plains, almost ripping the wagon covers off. The horses, spooked, needed constant calming. Thick snow coated the rutted roads, making them slippery as ice. Elias Brubaker warned they were on borrowed time. "Fort Larned is only a day or two farther," he said, but the worry in his voice contradicted his optimistic words. "We ride fast tomorrow." They never got that chance. That evening, as the winds pummeled the encampment, Walter saw faint flickers of torches a half-mile away. Thinking it was possibly another group of travelers, he and 2 other men ventured out to investigate. Hours passed with no sign of them returning. Anxiety festered in Eleanor's stomach as she waited perched at the wagon's entrance. She stared into a whirling darkness that offered no clue. When dawn arrived, Elias and the remaining men went searching. They found the bodies of the 2 men half buried in the snow. Walter Harper's footprints trailed further on into a ravine dotted with twisted juniper trees. It was there that they discovered him shot through the chest, lying still upon the frozen earth. Whether it was bandits or renegades, no one could say. The men carried his body back and gently laid him beside the wagon. Eleanor, struck with a thunderous grief, let out a wail that echoed across the vacant, snowbound plains. Still shocked and in labor, she clutched her midsection, the pangs so sharp they threatened to tear her apart. The baby wasn't due for another month, but fear, trauma, and heartbreak often refuse to follow a calendar. Elias tried to help, but his medical knowledge was scarce. The rest of the wagon party was too small and too frightened. One woman, Edna Crowley, a mother of 4 grown children, did her best to assist. Through Eleanor's agony, Edna tried to soothe her, sponging her brow with melted snow water. The harrowing night was filled with sobs, moans, and the unrelenting moan of the wind. Eleanor delivered 2 small but living baby boys as the final echoes of twilight merged into a bitter dawn. She looked upon their tiny faces, but her eyes were swollen with tears for Walter. In the same night she lost her husband, she gained the 2 precious souls she had carried across half the continent. The heartbreak nearly shattered her. She was too weak, too exhausted, and the wind chill threatened to take her life. Elias and Edna knew they could not keep the wagon train in place indefinitely. Provisions were running dangerously low. The group decided they had no choice but to break camp and move on, hoping to reach Fort Larned. They tried to persuade Eleanor to come with them, but she lay feverish, whispering that she couldn't leave Walter's side until he was given a proper burial. A fierce debate ensued, but the concluding argument was that staying longer meant risking everyone's survival. She was given a day, just a day, to bury her husband and rest as best she could. On that final morning, Elias approached Eleanor with a sorrowful face and a small flask of whiskey. "We're leaving," he said simply. "Pack what you can. If you don't come now, the storm might bury us all." Eleanor nodded, tears glazing her cheeks. She nestled her 2 babies in a makeshift cradle. Walter's old leather satchel lined with blankets, and stumbled out into the snow to kneel by his newly dug grave. Ice had formed on the edges of the pit, and she could barely keep her footing. Her hands trembled as she scattered a handful of snow over the wooden box. She whispered a prayer voice, ragged in the biting air. Elias and the others turned away, too overcome by guilt and grief to watch. Horses were hitched, wagons creaked, and with a final shouted command, the train lurched forward. Soon even the sound of their wheels vanished into the shrieking wind, leaving Eleanor alone. The remainder of that day felt like a cruel test of endurance. Eleanor had been left a small portion of hardtack, a bit of jerky, and a water skin that was half frozen. The wagon she and Walter once shared was battered from the storm, one wheel cracked. Inside it offered partial shelter against the howling gale, but it was no fortress. Her twins, named Frederick and James after their grandfathers, slept fitfully, their cries piercing her soul. If not for the sheer determination of a mother, Eleanor might have collapsed from despair. But each time she faltered, the boys' whimpers reminded her she had a duty to live. She tried to nurse them, but malnourishment and shock were taking their toll on her body. She was generating less milk with each passing hour. The water in the canteen froze over again, forcing her to melt snow in a small tin pot over a weak, sputtering flame. As night approached, the wind shrieked louder, as though nature itself sought to crush them. Eleanor huddled closer to the babies, tucking them under layers of blankets. She prayed desperately not for miracles, but for one more sunrise. She got her wish. At dawn, the world was a chilling tapestry of white and grey. Every direction looked the same, a frosty sea of snow and ice. Only the battered wagon's wooden beams offered a sense of orientation. By midday, the flame of the last candle had flickered out. She tried to burn scraps of wood from the shattered wheel, but soon the meager supply was gone. The cold crept in further, gripping her limbs in a slow, numbing embrace. By the second evening, she was delirious. Each breath was a fresh battle, her vision blurred. She imagined she saw Walter standing by the burial mound, beckoning her. At times, she fancied hearing the wagon train returning for her. But reality proved harsher than the illusions. Her lips cracked, cheeks raw. Her arms, though freezing, remained locked around Frederick and James. Time lost all meaning. Day and night blurred in a haze of pain. The howling wind was a lullaby of impending doom. In her half-conscious state, she whispered to the twins, telling them stories of their father. She recounted how Walter once caught a catfish the size of his arm back in Tennessee, and how he dreamed of building them a home with a wide porch overlooking endless fields. She told them all the dreams that were meant to unfold, and the wind continued its unrelenting refrain. Eleanor was not certain if it was the second or third night. Each hour dripped away like a candle burning on both ends when a noise broke through the howling storm. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks again, but then she heard it more distinctly. A sharp whistle that rose above the gale, followed by the muffled sound of hooves crunching snow. Fear stirred. She had heard of roving outlaws picking off stranded pioneers. She considered the pistol Walter had left behind, now stashed under a wagon cushion. But her limbs were so numb, she could barely move. The best she could manage was to shift her weight to shield the twins with her body. A figure appeared, dark, silhouetted against the swirling snow. Eleanor blinked rapidly, convinced she was dreaming. But the figure drew closer, revealing the shape of a horse and rider. The horse's breath condensed in plumes as the rider dismounted. Moving with practiced precision, the stranger approached, scanning the ground. Eleanor tried to call out, but her throat only managed a ragged whisper. The man crouched low beside the wagon, peering into her makeshift shelter. Moonlight broke through a crack in the storm clouds, illuminating features that were foreign, yet resolute. Braided hair, coppery skin, a face etched by the harshness of the plains. A Comanche. Eleanor had heard of the Comanche, the tribe whose territory once spanned vast tracts of the southern plains. She had also heard stories, many of them rooted in fear about raids and kidnappings. Yet in that moment, she could only feel relief that another human being had found her before the snow claimed her life. In broken English, the man spoke. "You alive?" He asked each word, tentative, as though recalling phrases from memory. He placed a hand gently on Eleanor's shoulder, checking for warmth or pulse. When she nodded weakly, her eyes fluttering, he carefully lifted the blankets, revealing the two whimpering, half-frozen infants. A brief expression of shock crossed his face, followed by something gentler concern, perhaps. Eleanor tried to speak, but her voice came in raspy gasps. "Help, my boys," she managed. The Comanche nodded. He went back to his horse, rummaging through a saddlebag. Moments later, he returned with a small container of dried meat and a horn canteen filled with water. With a careful hand, he tilted the container to Eleanor's lips. The water tasted of leather and smoke, but it was the sweetest relief she'd ever known. She drank sparingly, mindful that too much too soon might harm her. Next, he handed her a piece of jerky, gesturing for her to chew. Then, turning his attention to the twins, the Comanche quickly checked their breathing. One of them had begun to cry weakly. The other was silent and frighteningly still. With surprisingly gentle movements, the man cradled the silent infant in his arms, rubbing its small hands to encourage circulation, pressing the child close to the warmth of his own chest beneath his buffalo hide robe. The stranger's presence ignited a tiny spark of hope in Eleanor. Though she didn't know his name, though she was nearly delirious, some instinct told her that she could trust him. In the days to come, her survival and that of her newborn twins would depend entirely on his mercy. Over the next 24 hours, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness. She had feverish dreams. Walter's face, the swirling snows, a blazing sun over wide, open prairies. When she awakened momentarily, she found herself tucked into thick animal hides near a small fire. The wagon was still nearby, but an improvised lean-to had been erected against one side, creating a more secure shelter. The twins were bundled together, lying on a blanket that smelled faintly of sage. She noticed the Comanche quietly tending the fire. His horse was tethered a few steps away, muzzle buried in the snow to reach the sparse grass beneath. From time to time, the man moved to Eleanor's side, checking her pulse or offering more water. It was only on the second day, once her strength had somewhat returned, that the two exchanged halting words. He introduced himself as Kopaw, pronounced Ko-pa, which he explained meant dark hawk in his language. As best as he could manage in English, he told Eleanor that he was a tracker and scout for traders who traveled near the Red River and sometimes as far north as Fort Larned. He earned modest pay helping them avoid dangerous terrain and navigate buffalo trails. But he was on his own now, traveling to rejoin distant kinfolk after parting ways with a caravan. Eleanor's lips trembled as she tried to thank him. I owe you my life. My children owe you their lives." Kopaw shrugged with quiet humility. "A spirit led me here," he said. "Saw tracks in snow. Wagon. I followed. Found you." She glanced at the battered wagon behind them. "My husband." She swallowed hard, tears returning. "He's gone." He nodded with solemn understanding. "Bad men, maybe. Or you lost your way." Eleanor found she lacked the words or energy to explain the full depth of her tragedy. Instead, she simply murmured, "I'm alone." Kopaw stared at her for a moment, then at the twins. "Not alone now," he answered softly. "We move soon." But moving was not so simple. Eleanor was barely strong enough to feed herself, let alone care for 2 infants under the weight of the relentless cold. Although the storm had subsided, temperatures remained dangerously low, and fresh snowfall threatened to trap them. From their supply vantage, they had next to nothing Kopaw's small ration of dried meat, a little more water, and what was left in Eleanor's wagon, some broken tools, an empty burlap sack, and a single pistol with only 2 bullets. By all practical measures, survival was uncertain. Quopaw spent a day repairing the wagon wheel as best he could, binding the cracked wood with strips of leather. Though far from stable, it might last a short distance provided they traveled slowly. Another concern was the horse. Quopaw's mount, named Aki, was sturdy, but not strong enough to pull the entire wagon loaded with supplies. After some discussion, mostly through gestures and fragments of English, they decided Quopaw would harness Aki and attempt to move the wagon at a slow pace. Meanwhile, Eleanor would remain inside to protect the twins from the brutal wind. On the morning they departed, the sky was a crisp, pale blue. The snow glistened, seeming innocent compared to the cruelty it unleashed just days earlier. Eleanor wrapped the twins together in a large swath of cloth, securing them against her chest. They stirred softly, warmed by her body heat. Quopaw whistled to Aki, coaxing the horse into a strained effort to pull the battered wagon across the icy ground. Progress was painfully slow. Each time the wheel threatened to buckle, Quopaw would jump down, examine the damage, and reinforce his makeshift repairs. Eleanor inside the wagon braced against the jolts, quietly praying for their safety. She felt every bump, every jostle. Her muscles ached. The twins cried occasionally, but mostly they slept, exhaustion overtaking their fragile little bodies. By midday, the temperature rose enough to melt some of the snow, turning the ground into slush. At times, Quopaw scouted ahead, seeking a path of firmer terrain. On more than one occasion, he circled back, leading the horse by the bridle, while picking out the least treacherous route. The day stretched on. They traveled less than 5 miles before the sun dipped toward the horizon. Quopaw found a sheltered hollow near a stand of cottonwoods. He gestured for Eleanor to remain in the wagon while he hacked through the underbrush to gather kindling. Though she was wary, she had little choice. She clutched her infant's close eyes, flickering with fatigue. The memory of bandits who killed Walter still haunted her. But she tried to trust Quopaw, telling herself he'd had plenty of opportunities to harm her if that was his intention. When night fell, Quopaw managed to start a small fire at the hollow's center. He built a windbreak using fallen branches and the wagon's side panel. Though the winter chill clung to her bones, Eleanor felt a measure of security in this meager campsite. Exhausted beyond words, she closed her eyes. Only the gentle crackling of the fire and the soft breath of her babies accompanied her into a fitful slumber. Morning arrived clear and bitterly cold. Quopaw and Eleanor resumed their slow journey westward, heading for Fort Larned. According to Quopaw's estimate, it might be 2, perhaps 3 days away at their wagon's pace. Eleanor worried about supplies. They were almost out of dried meat. Milk for the twins dwindled as her body still reeled from her near-fatal ordeal. Around midday, Quopaw halted. He knelt by some tracks in the snow, pressing his fingers into the imprint. Eleanor could see from the wagon that his posture grew tense. When he stood up, he pointed west, then placed his hand over his mouth, shaking his head. Tracks. 4 or 5 men horses. Not Comanche, he said. Travel fast. Eleanor felt her heart tighten. Were these the same men who killed Walter bandits? She looked at the pistol by her side, wondering if it would do any good. 2 bullets against several armed riders seemed like a pitiful defense. Quopaw climbed back into the driver's seat. "We go around," he said simply, urging Aki to change direction. Safer route. However, evading trouble on the open plains was never so simple. The men who made those tracks had chosen their path for a reason. It lay near the better water sources and the easiest inclines. Quopao tried to guide them along a more circuitous route, but the wagon wheel nearly buckled on uneven terrain. After a tense moment, he paused, scanning the horizon. The massive expanse of open land left them exposed. In the far distance, a swirl of dust indicated movement. Eleanor's pulse quickened at the thought of being overtaken by unknown riders. As the sun dipped, Quopao located a rocky outcropping that offered partial concealment. They made camp lighting no fire, hoping to remain unseen. That night, Eleanor hardly slept. She held the twins, listening for every rustle in the dark. Quopao posted himself on a small ledge, scanning the moonlit plain. The hush was uneasy. Even Aki's gentle snorts seemed too loud, but no intruders appeared. At dawn, they pressed on, stamina fraying. By afternoon, the wagon's battered wheel snapped at the hub. With a groan of despair, Quopao surveyed the damage. It was beyond the scope of a simple field repair. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked, voice taut with fear and exhaustion. The twins fussed, mewling for milk she could scarcely provide. Quopao looked down the trail, then back at Eleanor. Fort Larned close, less than 1 day ride on horse. Wagon. No more. They both understood the implications. Leave the wagon behind. But how could Eleanor, still weak, travel on horseback with 2 infants? Perhaps Quopao saw the terror in her eyes, for he approached gently. "I'll carry you. We ride slow." "Careful," he said. Eleanor glanced at the wagon, a pang of sorrow hitting her. This had been her home with Walter, the repository of their few earthly possessions. In that wagon were old letters from her parents, quilts from her childhood, and the pieces of her shattered hopes. But those memories would have to remain behind, just like the snow-draped grave. Survival came first. Taking only the essentials, a few blankets, the pistol, and some water, Quopao and Eleanor prepared to mount the horse. Eleanor swaddled Frederick and James tightly, forming a secure wrap that kept them pressed to her chest. With Quopao's help, she climbed onto the horse's broad back. He positioned himself behind her, gripping the reins. She tried not to think about how precarious it felt. She had ridden a horse only a handful of times, and never in such a weakened condition or with such precious cargo in her arms. "Hold tight," Quopao instructed. She felt his warm breath against her ear. "We go now." With a soft nudge to Aki's flanks, they set off. Riding without the wagon did grant them more speed, but not by much. Eleanor was frail, and Quopao seemed mindful of that, letting the horse maintain a gentle, steady gait. They paused occasionally to rest. Late in the day, they spotted a copse of trees near a shallow ravine that might serve as a decent campsite. The land sloped down to a creek, its water partially frozen, but still moving beneath the ice. Thankful for any sign of life that could offer fresh water, Quopao guided Aki to the creek's edge. Eleanor dismounted stiffly, legs wobbling. The twins stirred but did not cry out. She took a moment to kneel by the water's edge, filling a small canteen. Quopao bent to inspect tracks near the creek. He stiffened, placing a finger to his lips for silence. Before Eleanor could ask why, they both heard a distinct sound, the snapping of a twig somewhere upstream. Then came voices low and hushed, but unmistakably human. Quopao motioned for Eleanor to remain still. Then he inched forward, peering around a clump of brush. She saw him recoil slightly before he turned back with urgency. "Bandits," he whispered. 3. Maybe more. Big fire. Many horses. Eleanor's heart sank. She knew that Quopaw could probably slip away on foot, but with her and the infants it was impossible to remain unseen for long. They had to retreat, but the open land around them offered no safe cover for miles. Before they could act, a voice shouted from the trees. "Who's out there?" They froze. The undergrowth rustled, and 3 men with rifles emerged. Their expressions were stony with suspicion. One was a gaunt figure with a greasy beard wearing a tattered Union Army jacket. Another was taller, scar-faced, with eyes that glinted malevolently. The third was younger, possibly in his late teens, brandishing a revolver that wobbled in his nervous grip. Quopaw raised his hands, slowly motioning Eleanor to do the same. She clutched the twins tight, her breath ragged. "Well, well," sneered the bearded man. "What do we have here? A Comanche savage and a woman with babes. Where the hell you come from?" Eleanor tried to speak, her voice barely audible. "We're just passing," she whispered. We mean you no harm." The scar-faced man let out a coarse laugh. "Mean us no harm," she says. "Don't see folks out here for no reason." The teenage outlaw pointed his revolver, though his hand shook. "Looks like they got nothing. Might have some valuables hidden, though." A flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, passed through Eleanor's mind. Could these men be linked to Walter's killers? She had no proof, but the possibility churned her stomach. She glanced at Quopaw, who stood as still as a statue. She saw tension in his jaw, he was calculating. She also noticed one crucial detail: his quiver of arrows was on the horse, out of immediate reach. The scar-faced man jabbed a thumb at Quopaw. "Tie him up. We'll see if these 2 have anything worth taking." The younger man licked his lips nervously, stepping forward with a rope. Quopaw's muscles tensed, but he did not move. In a surge of desperation, Eleanor found her voice. "Please spare him. Spare us. We have 2 babies. We're just trying to reach Fort Larned." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she steeled herself, meeting the bearded man's eyes. "There's nothing we have that you could want. Just let us go." The bearded man eyed her cynically. "Nothing. Maybe a warm scalp for the bounty," he said, glaring at Quopaw. "And a woman's company ain't worthless." He stepped closer, a leering grin across his sallow face. Instinct told Eleanor to recoil, but a mother's protectiveness flared in her. Fear and fury mingled in her chest. "Don't come any closer," she warned. Despite her trembling hands, she shifted the twins carefully, freeing one arm enough to reach for the pistol tucked beneath her blanket. The teenage outlaw raised his own weapon, panic in his eyes. "She's got a gun!" Everything happened in a wild flurry. Quopaw lunged toward them. The nearest man grappling for the rifle. The bearded bandit swung the butt of his rifle, striking Quopaw across the jaw. Scarface raised his weapon to fire, but hesitated in the chaos. Eleanor managed to draw her pistol, though the weight felt enormous, the barrel wavering. She squeezed the trigger. A thunderous crack tore the air. The bullet whizzed past the scar-faced man, missing him by inches, but sending him stumbling backward in fright. Before she could aim again, the teenage outlaw raised his revolver, heart pounding so loudly it was almost visible. Quopaw, dazed, tried to grab the rifle from the bearded bandit. They struggled in the snow, fists pounding, arms thrashing. Scarface finally got his wits together, raising his gun to aim at Eleanor, or Quopaw. Eleanor couldn't tell which. Time felt distorted, everything happening at once. She forced her trembling arms to steady. She had one bullet left. If she missed, they were all dead. She inhaled sharply, remembering Walter's instructions on how to shoot take a breath. Fix your aim. Squeeze the trigger, not pull. Her mind flashed with every desperation, every sorrow, every ounce of will to protect her babies. The shot rang out. This time the bullet found its mark. Scarface jerked sideways, his rifle dropping. A dark stain blossomed across his coat as he collapsed in a swirl of snow. A scream erupted from the teenage outlaw. He fired wildly, the shot ricocheting off the rocks. Kopor, fueled by adrenaline, twisted out of the bearded man's grip, seized the rifle and swung it hard, connecting with the teenager's temple. The young man crumpled on the spot, unconscious, or worse. The bearded bandit stared wide-eyed at the carnage, then scrambled for a pistol at his belt. Kopor cocked the rifle in an instant. "No," he said, voice low and lethal. The bandit froze. Through a swollen lip, Kopor spat blood. Leave or die. Torn between vengeance and survival. Eleanor cradled the screaming twins, tears streaking down her face. She half expected Kopor to pull the trigger, but Kopor's glare was enough. The bearded man dropped his weapon and ran stumbling through the snow, not looking back. The teenage outlaw lay motionless. Scarface moaned faintly, but his wound looked severe. Eleanor stared at the scene, heart pounding. She had never taken a life before. She felt no triumph, only numb horror. The baby's cries rose, insistent and frantic. Kopor moved to her side, checking her for injuries. She was unhurt aside from the emotional shock. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering the only comfort he could. They both knew they had to leave, and fast. Time was of the essence. The gunshots would carry for miles. Eleanor could barely stand, her legs quaking. Kopor whistled for Aki, who had backed away, eyes wild from the commotion. With hurried gestures, Kopor helped Eleanor back on the horse. He retrieved his quiver and bow from the saddle. Though it pained him to leave potential supplies behind, food, maybe ammunition searching the outlaw's camp could bring more trouble. They had to vanish into the plains. They galloped away, heading southwest, guided by Kopor's knowledge of the land. Each hoofbeat jarred Eleanor's exhausted body, but adrenaline kept her conscious. The babies cried sporadically. She tried to soothe them, pressing kisses to their foreheads. The wind whipped her hair, stinging her cheeks. Clouds scuttled overhead, threatening snow once more. By midday, they saw a faint line of smoke on the horizon. Fort Larned came into view, its wooden stockade walls and American flag rising from a central parade ground. The sight was surreal to Eleanor, like a bastion of civilization after weeks of chaos and heartbreak. 2 soldiers on horseback appeared, rifles at the ready. They approached warily, seeing Kopor, first arrow knocked in his bow. Eleanor called out, voice cracking. "Help! We need help. Please." The soldiers halted, tension rippling through them. One took in the sight of Eleanor's pale face and the infants in her arms, and demanded, "State your business." She swallowed. "My name is Eleanor Harper. I was part of a wagon train. Got separated. My husband. He's dead. Please, we just need help. This man." She looked at Kopor, who remained silent. "He saved me." A flicker of caution glinted in the soldier's eyes, especially directed toward Kopor. But upon seeing Eleanor's battered condition, they lowered their weapons. "Fort Larned is under orders to assist settlers in distress," the older soldier said. He beckoned for them to ride on. "You'll have to speak with Captain Avery." A wave of relief washed over Eleanor. They entered the fort's gates, passing stables, barracks, and storehouses. Soldiers and a few civilians stared at them curiously. Copaw kept a respectful distance, guiding the horse with care. This was not his preferred place. He knew the tension between the army and his tribe, but he was here for Eleanor, for the children he had sworn to protect. When they finally dismounted, Eleanor's legs nearly gave out. A kindly nurse wearing a plain dress and apron rushed to her side. "My God, you're half frozen," she exclaimed gently, gathering Eleanor toward the infirmary. Copaw trailed quietly, uncertain if he would be permitted inside. Another soldier blocked his path at first, then grudgingly stepped aside when Eleanor insisted, "He comes with me." The nurse, whose name was Harriet Barnes, helped Eleanor into a warm cot in a cramped infirmary. The twins were swaddled, looked over by a fort physician, who clucked his tongue in surprise that they had survived. Incredible, he muttered, using a stethoscope to listen to their tiny chests. They're underweight, but no frostbite. Eleanor felt tears of gratitude threaten to spill again. After the doctor examined her and found no major injuries besides exhaustion, Harriet offered her a cup of steaming broth. She took it gratefully, the warmth blossoming through her body. Then she gestured for Copaw to come closer, motioning for him to also have some broth. He resisted politely at first, but Harriet insisted, speaking with surprising kindness. While they settled, a stern-looking officer wearing a captain's insignia arrived. He introduced himself as Captain Richard Avery, commanding officer of the garrison. With one glance at the Comanche man in the infirmary, Avery's posture stiffened. "Ma'am," he said to Eleanor, "I need you to explain how you came to be out there." "With him." Eleanor, her voice still hoarse, recounted the harrowing story: Walter's death, the wagon train's departure, the snowstorm that nearly killed her, and Copaw's selfless rescue. She tried her best to convey that Copaw had risked his own life multiple times. Captain Avery listened occasionally, glancing skeptically at Copaw, who stood stoically, understanding only fragments of the conversation. When she reached the part about the bandit encounter, Captain Avery's face darkened. "We've had trouble with outlaws in these parts for weeks. You must have run afoul of a nasty bunch." After hearing the full account, Captain Avery sighed. "Well, Mrs. Harper, you're lucky to be alive. This Comanche man, we don't usually see them traveling alone. But if he's done what you said, then I suppose we owe him a measure of gratitude." Eleanor nodded emphatically. "He saved my children, Captain. He saved me." Captain Avery pressed his lips together. "We can offer you shelter, medical attention, and ration shares, ma'am. As for your friend here, we'll allow him to stay on a short-term basis while we assess the situation. I trust there won't be any trouble." Eleanor understood the tension in his tone. She glanced at Copaw, who dipped his head slightly, an unspoken sign of respect or acceptance. "He won't be any trouble," she said firmly. "Then we'll do our best to care for you both," said the captain. With a formal nod, he turned and left. Over the next few days, Eleanor and the twins received much-needed rest and food. Under Harriet's nurturing care, Frederick and James began to grow stronger, their cries a little more robust. Eleanor felt a deep gratitude that she was alive to hear those cries. Yet each time she closed her eyes, the images of Walter and the wagon haunted her dreams. Copaw was treated with cautious respect by most of the garrison. Some soldiers kept their distance. Others were outright hostile, muttering slurs behind his back. But Harriet spoke kindly to him, offering extra portions of stew. A stable hand was impressed by his skill with horses and asked questions about plains survival. Slowly, Copaw found a small corner of acceptance. One evening, as Eleanor sat by a small brazier in the fort's courtyard, Watching the snowy wind swirl over the walls, Quopaw approached her. He sat cross-legged beside her. She could tell he was worried. "You, what will do now?" he asked haltingly. Eleanor gazed at the babies who slept in a makeshift cradle Harriet had found. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've lost my husband. My wagon is gone. We have no home." She shrugged, a lump forming in her throat. "Captain Avery said the fort can't keep us indefinitely. They're short on supplies, too." Quopaw nodded. He looked up at the fading sky. "Winter is harsh. Maybe you stay in settlement or with soldiers. I can lead you." She was silent for a moment. The heartbreak of losing Walter still felt fresh like an open wound. But she was alive, and so were her children. She felt a stirring inside, a faint echo of the resolve that once brought her west. She had come seeking a new life. Now it was a different life than she had imagined, but still a life. She glanced at Quopaw's solemn face. "We'll need land, a place to build a cabin, maybe near a settlement. But it's not safe with the outlaws around. And I have no means to do this alone." A flicker of understanding passed between them. Quopaw's expression was determined. "I help," he said. A simple promise, but it filled Eleanor's chest with warmth. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor and the twins remained at Fort Larned. The officers, including Captain Avery, recognized that Quopaw's tracking skills could be valuable. Whispers circulated that the cavalry might hire him as a scout. For Eleanor, Harriet arranged for her to help in the infirmary, cleaning instruments, bandaging minor wounds. In return, Harriet gave her lessons on basic nursing and childcare under frontier conditions. Gradually, as Frederick and James put on weight, Eleanor found small pockets of peace. She would step onto the ramparts at dawn, the rising sun transforming the snow into glittering gold. She still mourned Walter, often crying quietly at night when the twins were asleep, but she also felt a sense of gratitude that she'd come so far and remained alive, forging an unexpected alliance with a Comanche man who owed her nothing, yet gave her everything. Through Harriet's assistance, Eleanor petitioned the local land office for a small homestead near Walnut Creek, not far from the fort. The officer in charge raised an eyebrow at a lone widow's request, but Harriet's endorsement plus Captain Avery's recommendation swung the decision in her favor. A modest grant of land, 40 acres of rolling grass with a small stand of cottonwoods near a creek, was drawn up in her name. It was hardly prime farmland, but it was something. When Eleanor told Quopaw the news, he nodded. "You have place?" he asked. She smiled. "Yes, but I'll need help to build, to keep watch. The outlaws are still out there." Quopaw's face hardened. He had not forgotten the men who nearly killed them. "I come," he said. "Help you watch for danger." "But your people?" Eleanor ventured softly, thinking he might want to return to his tribe. The corner of his mouth curved in a faint smile. "They are far south now." "Maybe. Later I go see them. For now I stay." There were no words strong enough to convey her gratitude, so Eleanor simply placed a hand on his forearm, eyes shining with unspoken thanks. Spring arrived in slow, delicate steps. The snows receded, revealing the grasslands underneath. Birds returned their calls, echoing across the plains. Eleanor's babies had passed their first precarious months, and while they remained small, they smiled and gurgled in ways that filled her heart with hope. With some help from fort supplies, and through Quopaw's skilled foraging and hunting, they gathered enough resources to attempt their new homestead. Captain Avery granted them an old, broken-down wagon. Copaw repaired it, making it serviceable. They loaded the wagon with timber nails, simple tools, and enough food to last a few weeks. Harriet tearfully hugged Eleanor goodbye, pressing a parcel of dried vegetables into her hands. "Take care," Harriet whispered. "You come back if you need anything." "Understand?" Eleanor nodded, misty-eyed. "Thank you. For everything." Copaw led Aki, now joined by another horse the fort had allowed them to borrow, and they set out for Walnut Creek. The land office had given them a rough map. When they arrived, Eleanor felt a wave of awe. The land was modest, but the creek flowed with fresh water. Cottonwoods provided shade. Grass swayed gently in the breeze. Though it lacked a finished house or fence, it represented a chance at renewal. They pitched a canvas tent near the creek to serve as temporary shelter. Each day, Copaw and Eleanor worked side by side, constructing a log cabin. With surprising dexterity, Copaw felled small trees, trimmed them to size, and helped Eleanor stack them for the walls. Eleanor learned quickly how to use a hand saw, how to drive nails, how to chink the gaps with a mixture of mud and straw. It was back-breaking labor, but each log raised brought them closer to having a real roof over their heads. At night by the fire, Eleanor sang softly to Frederick and James. Sometimes Copaw listened quietly, a faint smile on his lips. They shared stories, Eleanor telling him about her childhood in Tennessee, Copaw, explaining in broken English some of the Comanche traditions, living in teepees, following the buffalo herds, and their spiritual bond with the land. Though their upbringings were worlds apart, each recognized in the other a fierce determination to survive. Eventually, the cabin walls stood firm. A thatched roof sealed with pitch shielded them from the rains. The floor was simple packed earth. They crafted a small cradle from spare wood for the twins, who seemed delighted by the new space, though they were just old enough to begin crawling about. The homestead took shape: a small corral for the horses, a hand-dug plot for vegetables, even a rickety clothes line Eleanor had fashioned from rope. Life was hard, but it was theirs. Summer blossomed, bringing scorching days and sudden thunderstorms. The cabin withstood the downpours, though leaks sprang in one corner requiring constant patching. Copaw's skill at hunting kept them supplied with rabbit venison and occasionally wild turkey. Eleanor learned to preserve meat and gather wild herbs. The twins thrived on mashed roots, occasional goat's milk from a passing neighbor's farm, and the unwavering devotion of their mother. Yet the shadow of outlaws never completely vanished from Eleanor's mind. She carried the pistol, now fully out of bullets, as a useless talisman. One afternoon, while Copaw was away hunting, she spotted two riders in the distance. They didn't approach, merely hovered on the horizon, then turned and rode away. The fear that they might return to ransack her homestead gnawed at her. To address this danger, Copaw taught Eleanor how to handle a bow. Though her attempts were clumsy at first, she learned to nock an arrow, draw back, and release. She never achieved Copaw's precision, but she could hit a still target at close range. Each arrow in her quiver carried a small sense of empowerment. At least if trouble came, she wouldn't be defenseless. One early evening, as the sun dipped, Copaw returned from a scouting trip. His face was drawn. "Bandits," near he said. "4 men. I saw them by river. They saw me too." Panic flared in Eleanor's eyes. She clutched the twins, now about 9 months old, who were playing with wooden spoons on the cabin floor. "What do we do?" Copaw stepped inside, quietly latching the door. "We make ready," They come tonight or tomorrow." Eleanor's heart pounded. She whispered a fervent prayer for courage. Together they barricaded the door with a heavy table. Copor loaded his quiver. They extinguished the fire in the hearth to avoid casting light through the windows. Then they huddled, waiting for night to pass. Hours dragged on in tense silence. Around midnight, the horses outside snorted as if sensing an unfamiliar presence. Copal motioned to Eleanor, pointing to a gap in the cabin's wall. In the faint moonlight, they saw moving shapes near the corral. Eleanor's pulse hammered. She fitted an arrow to her bow, though her hands shook so badly she feared she'd drop it. Suddenly, a man's voice hissed, "We know you're in there. Come on out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." A second voice chimed in, "Hand over your valuables and the woman." Eleanor swallowed a surge of revulsion. Copal's jaw tightened. He raised his bow, took aim through the gap, and released an arrow. A pained shout rang out. Then gunshots. The cabin's wooden walls splintered in places. Eleanor crouched low, one arm around the twins, who began wailing. Another shot blasted, punching a hole in the table barricade. Smoke and the smell of gunpowder filled the cabin. Copal loosed another arrow. A curse echoed in the darkness, followed by a clatter as someone dropped a pistol. Emboldened by Copal's precision, Eleanor crept to a second gap in the wall, took a deep breath, and fired her own arrow. She missed, but the projectile soared close enough to startle one bandit. He shouted, "They got more than one archer in there. Watch it." A frantic standoff ensued. The outlaws tried to flank the cabin, but with no windows on the rear side, their vantage was limited. Copal seized the moment to slip through the door, bow in hand, circling around to catch them from behind. Gunfire erupted again. Eleanor, terrified, waited inside, hearing shouts, curses, and the ring of steel as a knife or tomahawk came into play. The twins' cries threatened to drown her senses. Finally, footsteps. A battered Copal burst back in, gripping a bleeding slash on his arm. "Two ran," he said, breathing heavily. "One dead, others gone." She held out her arms. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, though the crimson streaming down his forearm suggested otherwise. Together, they sealed the door again. Through the gap she saw a dark figure slumped near the corral. A bandit shot by arrow, or maybe stabbed. The night grew eerily silent, save the ragged breaths of Copal and the twins' muffled whimpers. Eleanor tore a strip of cloth to bandage Copal's wound, her hands steady, despite her trembling heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "I owe you everything again." He shook his head, eyes meeting hers with fierce intensity. "We protect family." Those words surprised Eleanor as they echoed in her chest. Family. She swallowed hard. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but yes, somehow they had become a family. She placed a trembling hand over his, letting the unspoken bond form in the hush of the night. Morning arrived, washing the land in pale light. The outlaws who had fled were nowhere in sight, leaving behind one fallen comrade and a swirl of footprints. With Copal wounded, Eleanor saddled Aki and rode to a neighbor's farm 2 miles away, seeking help. The neighbor, a grizzled ex-soldier, accompanied her back with a loaded shotgun. Together, they dealt with the grim task of burying the bandit. The local rumor mill would undoubtedly spread the tale of an audacious assault and the Comanche tracker who defended a lone widow's homestead. Days passed without further incident. Copaux's wound healed slowly, thanks to Eleanor's careful bandaging and knowledge gleaned from Harriet. The twins recovered from the ordeal, soon laughing and babbling as though the night of terror had never happened. Late that summer, a messenger from Fort Larned arrived bearing a letter addressed to Eleanor. Inside, Harriet wrote in her flowing script, "My dearest Eleanor, I trust this letter finds you and your precious babies in good health. Word reached the fort of some trouble on your homestead. I do hope you are safe. We think of you often, and Captain Avery sends his regards. He wishes to offer Copaux an official position as a scout, if he is willing part-time, of course. I have enclosed a small bit of money, my personal contribution to help you with supplies. Please visit when you can. Yours in friendship. Harriet." Eleanor folded the letter. Heart warmed by Harriet's kindness. She turned to Copaux and relayed Harriet's message. He listened carefully, though the finer points of the language eluded him. But he caught the main idea: a position as a scout meant steady income and a measure of respect. He looked at Eleanor, eyes questioning. "You want me go?" She bit her lip. "Only if you want to. If you do, you can earn money. But that means traveling. I don't want you to think you're bound here." He reached out and gently tapped the cradle where Frederick and James napped. "I help care for them for you. If I scout, we have supplies." "Yes. Yes," she said, her voice soft. "We'd be better off. But it's your choice." He lowered his gaze thoughtfully. At last he nodded. "I go. But not leave forever. I come back." A flood of relief mingled with sadness washed over Eleanor. "We'll be here waiting." And thus a new chapter unfurled for them. Copaux, the Comanche tracker, would ride the plains as a scout for Fort Larned, charting safe passages for wagon trains and warning of outlaw bands. Eleanor, widowed but unbroken, would nurture her homestead, raising 2 bright-eyed twins in the wide Kansas plains, carrying on the dream she and Walter had once shared, now transformed yet still alive. They shared a parting embrace when the day came for Copaux to head back to the fort. In the hush of dawn, with the smell of wildflowers drifting across the grass, Copaux gently pressed his forehead to Eleanor's, a Comanche gesture of deep respect and connection. She felt tears slip free, but her heart brimmed with gratitude and hope. "I will return," he promised, mounting Aki and nudging the horse forward. Frederick and James squirmed in Eleanor's arms as if sensing the shift in their small world. She waved, watching Copaux grow smaller across the horizon. Then turning, she gazed at the cabin. The rough walls, the patched roof, the land that stretched beyond. A gentle wind ruffled her hair, a whisper of promise. The future would be uncertain. Yes, but she had come this far, endured storms both literal and figurative, and found an ally in the most unlikely of places. Through that bond, her family had survived, and with the frontier's vast expanse laid out before her, Eleanor Harper believed they would continue to thrive, forging a new chapter in the unrelenting tapestry of the American West. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of heartbreak and hope on the wild frontier. Eleanor Harper's resolve to survive, even when destiny seemed to strike her down, reminds us that courage can appear in the most unexpected moments and from the most unexpected allies. From the bitter cold of a blizzard to the lurking dangers of outlaws, she and her newborn twins might have succumbed had it not been for the unwavering kindness of a Comanche tracker named Copaux. If this saga of perseverance in a hostile land has moved or inspired you, please like this video, share it with fellow story lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more stirring tales from history and beyond. Every click of support helps keep these stories alive, reminding us all that in the darkest hour, hope can shine brightest and can unite us across all divides.